hopefully hit record. So here we are, and my name's Dave Malinowski here. I'm on the right there. I'm in the Graduate School of Education right here at Berkeley.
And I'm Viola Lasmana. I'm a master's student in English from San Francisco State University. And Dave and I, we've both been involved as students and as teachers, teaching assistants, using social media like blogs, wiki, social networks in the classroom with mixed results. But we want to use this time not as an opportunity to talk about teaching with social media specifically, or to find fault with any of these technologies per se. Instead, we want to interrogate the nature of the public that students in higher education find themselves today, and to think critically about what kind of people they can be in that space.
Right, and so basically today we have two big questions that we want to pose, that we're asking ourselves, but we want to pose to you for consideration. And I'll also like to ask you to think about your university and school context, of course, but also other kinds of institutional contexts that you're involved in, in which social media are an active part. We have two big questions right here. The first one is this: what insights does the use of social media in the university classroom give us about the role of institutional power in defining relationships between students and the public?
And the second question we want to pose is, what are among the most crucial intellectual and personal dispositions necessary for students to realize the participatory model of social media in the classroom?
Great, and so we're actually going to take the second question first and the first question second. And our strategy here is actually going to be to present a few of the students' own observations in our own personal teaching experience, and also to, in a very short time, not try to answer them, but to answer in response by asking a third question, one that traces back to Habermas's idea of the public before the advent of the public sphere.
Yeah, but before that, we'd also like to point out that earlier, Ken and both Richard have pointed out how great it is that we're doing this in the public university. And being students, teachers, and educators from public institutions, we feel it's important to point out that the public is in crisis. Budget cuts totaling up to $15 billion just this past year alone has left California the last state for funding per pupil. That's something that students are obviously advocating for. You've seen probably images of the strikes and walkouts and stuff that have been happening recently, but even the leaders of our universities, the Chancellor Bergenaw at Berkeley here and San Francisco State President Corrigan, have mentioned that the public university is now possibly not able to fulfill its basic obligations under the 1960 California Master Plan, which basically says that California public schools, institutions of higher education, need to provide opportunities for free and high-quality education for all, and we're very concerned about that. So it's in this context, I guess, that we see the expansion of social media use in the classroom as, at least in part, an effort to expand the university's influence while saving costs. The question that we want to start with here with Viola is, what about the students? Yep, thank you. So I'd like to focus on the challenge of rethinking the ability of public institutions to carry out their educational mission and allow students to become public intellectuals who participate in social and educational debates that directly involve their livelihoods and their access to the future. The importance of a multiliteracy's approach to teaching and learning was established by the New London Group in a seminal article published 14 years ago. The representation of knowledge in multimodal ways, incorporating different media forms, is, as we know, important to navigating a culturally and linguistically diverse world. In my experience as a teaching assistant and research assistant in a university classroom, however, the student's position is greatly complicated by the renegotiation of their private and social identities with both the scholarly and public communities. And this results in a lack of critical engagement with the full potentials of participatory models of learning. And furthermore, with the even more palpable tension between an increasingly collaborative, connected public and public universities that have greater restrictions placed by budget cuts, the question of the university as a possible site for civic engagement becomes even more pressing. So let me give you an example from my experience with using blogs in the university in order to illustrate the existing tensions between the classroom and the participatory model of social media.
Using blogs as the platform for regular writing assignments and longer projects in English classes, students are aware of the collaborative nature of such work. However, there is still a gap between the public nature of student work and the students' treatments of such public platforms of communication. In most cases, they are treating their classmates and the teacher as the only potential audience of their work, without taking into consideration the larger implications of work made public on the internet. One student even admitted that he does not engage in dialogues with other bloggers if he does not get a comment first on his own blog posts. So such cultural acts of writing in the classroom that use a participatory model but are still disengaged from the larger public then makes me wonder, how effectively can new media reposition the university as a site for civic engagement and social change, and also for reshaping teaching and learning? So these issues, I think, require the reconsideration of students as subjects who need to engage critically in the renegotiation of their private lives with the current multifarious and participatory culture, and to consider their subject positions as dynamic and interacting with multiple discourses, which will then allow the students to situate themselves across boundaries and in dialogue with both the educational community and the public community at large. So going back to my first point then, multiliteracy remains a way in which institutions can provide students with the tools to participate in the forum, allow them to be aware of their subject positions in relation to knowledge and practice, and to renegotiate their social identities with the public sphere.
Okay. So we're going to flip positions here and, and continue just for a few more minutes here. We'll stay off that for a second. But I'd like to flip the perspective a little bit from the focus on the student to the focus on the institution, and think about the extended on and offline cyber classroom and how it might enable or restrict the students' ability to represent themselves and their ideas online, talking about context, talking about power and representation. And Lincoln Dahlberg, writing in New Zealand, has presented something that we find really an interesting starting point. Thinking about the 6 conditions for measuring the quality of democratic discourse online, based on Habermas's theory of the public sphere as this realm for rational exchange of ideas, as we've been talking about already, but applied to the case of computer-mediated communication and rephrased here by us in terms of the educational context. I'm not going to go through everything, but it's interesting to note that in order for the public sphere to exist in CMC, Dahlberg says, there needs to be an autonomy from state and economic power. There needs to be a reflexivity built into it so that students are encountering their own ideas from a separate position and be able to switch positions with their interlocutors, see the viewpoints of the other. And sincerity and inclusion are both very key aspects of that as well. But in light of those people like Mark Poster, whose work was implicitly, I think, referred to in what Bill said right there, and others who think critically about the ways in which people are constituted in part by their online activity, one of the things we say might be missing from this list right here is the question of participation as performance. And the question that Judith Donath and many others have raised already today here about how people are not just representing their ideas, but versions of themselves to this symbolic marketplace that is Facebook, that is Twitter, and all of the others that we've been discussing. It raises a question then for us that will bring us through the final part of our presentation. What is representation? And how is it modulated by institutional power? I'd like to offer an insight to this by way of the words of some French language students who I've been working with in my own research here at Berkeley, and they're involved in a weekly 2x2 Skype exchange with tutors in France. And I'm going to show you a very short interview segment from that interaction. This is what it looks like in the classroom. It's in Dwinell Hall, for those of you familiar with Berkeley. The 2 students we're going to talk about we're calling T and D, and they were explaining to the researcher why they didn't participate too much in this supplementary blog assignment that their tutors in France had given them. T said has just said before this part appeared by D that if the assignment were mandatory and credit were offered, she would have done it. Meanwhile, D is on a different, kind of a different idea here and says something about what it means to have the other tutors, not her tutor, but the other tutors, able to see her own work. And would you like to be?
Yes. So D says, and then you feel that since you are talking to your tutor, they already know everything that you would have posted. But I guess it's better for all the other tutors to learn. there's also just that feeling that other people who are in your class could maybe find the blog and like see you. And you're just like, ah, okay.
Right. That's the operative word, I think. So in one sense, it's really interesting to us that in this class, getting points for blogging would have motivated them to participate. Blogging, as Dahlberg might have said, is not autonomous of state and economic power. But more interesting is the graded stance that we see here in the student statement towards the different publics that might be seeing what they post online. The other tutors in the different partner school in France might like to look at what they post, and that might be okay. But what really seems like unacceptable is for one's own peers, physically co-present in the classroom, to see what one had posted in the blog for this class. Or as Dee says, for them to see you. In contrast to the everyday sense that we bring to the term representation in terms of online participation, expressing our own thoughts or our own experiences, even the personhood in front of other people, we'd like to suggest in concluding here today that perhaps we'd better think about representation as Habermas describes at the outset of his structural transformation of the public sphere. In his exposition into this concept of the public sphere, as we heard early in the beginning this morning, in European societies in the 1600s and 1700s, representative publicness was an expression of the way that feudal power and visibility were fused together in the Middle Ages. For a manorial lord, to be public was to display oneself as an embodiment of some sort of higher power, while to be private was to be common. To be private was to be separate from power and utterly invisible. Yet, Habermas notes of the church, the centers of royal power and other authorities, their representation was still dependent on the presence of people before whom it was displayed. Feudal power needed the commoners to show its might before the world, and representation as we know it was made to serve the interests of power. So now, here in 2009, in classrooms like ours and in universities struggling to redefine themselves in the face of budget cuts, partly through empowering social media like blogs, wikis, and streaming lecture content, we'd like to pose the question to you. Is it possible that there is also a stiff price in using social media in institutional settings, media that we use to make ourselves public? The price that students and we all might have collectively become unwitting vehicles for the exercise of a much older power of networked hierarchies, one that makes itself public through us. Thank you.